What's up guys, Agent here again with another build video. This time we're going to be going over the Magicka Nightblade DPS for Clockwork City. Now, like the rest of our build videos, we're going to be going over our gear sets, our skill bars, and our CP distributions, and finish things off with a 3 million dummy parse, and we're going to take a quick look at our combat metrics report. Magicka Nightblades are in a very good spot as of Clockwork City, and they were in a very good spot previously in the past patch, Horns of the Reach. They actually can pull higher DPS than a Magicka Sorcerer in most scenarios, at least in non-pet Magicka Sorcerers at least. But they also add a little bit of group survivability with self-healing through their abilities, and just generally are very good as a second option as a ranged DPS class. They are the only one of 3 possible Magicka range DPS that pull good numbers as of Clockwork City. The other 2 being Magicka Sorcerer and the ranged Magplar. With the introduction of the Asylum staff, ranged Magplar comes into play now as a 3rd ranged Magicka DPS. Unfortunately, DKs and Magicka Wardens, they're kind of lacking a little bit in terms of DPS. Wardens just because they're hard to play, and DKs because they don't have very good ranged Magicka DPS abilities. So, Magicka Nightblades, if you want to play a ranged DPS and don't necessarily want to play a Sorc, Nightblade is a very good option for you guys to choose. Going to go over our gear first. Going to be using Valken Scoria. One of the downsides of playing a Magicka Nightblade is that you don't really have very good monster helm options. You basically have a choice between Lambris and Scoria. I prefer Scoria for the added health, but you can go Lambris as well. The problem with the Lambris is you don't really have many sources of fire damage. The only source is going to be your Destruction Staff Ultimate and your light attacks from your front bar. So this is kind of why Scoria is in play here. Scoria and Lambris pull pretty much the same DPS out of Magicka Nightblade. So you can pick your poison. I like Scoria because it gives you a little bit of extra health compared to using Lambris with 1 health enchant. Both of these are light. Our 5 piece is going to be Julianos. Because it is a crafted set, I recommend going with a heavy chest to get a little bit extra resistances out of it. And then the other 4 pieces here can be crafted as light, or you can go with medium, depending on whether you have a medium shoulder or head. That's because shoulders and head share the exact same armor value as legs and feet. So depending on your RNG, whether you manage to get Divine's medium Scoria pieces first, you can craft all 4 of these pieces in light, or if you want to go the easy route, just craft medium legs or feet of Julianos. For our jewelry, we're going to be going with Moon Dancer. You can also use Infallible Aether or Master Architect. Those are the 2 other sets that have pretty much the exact same bonuses. Infallible Aether gives you Spell Crit instead of Max Magicka as a 2-piece, but the DPS difference between those 3 sets are pretty small, so pretty much it's going to be a pick whatever set you manage to get the Infernal Staff in first. All 3 of these pieces have spell damage enchants. Magicka Nightblades have very, very good sustain compared to Magicka Sorcerers and ranged Magplars. That's just because they have access to Siphoning Strikes, which really, really helps out your sustain. It's basically an added about 200, 220 extra regen. So you don't really need to put any regen glyphs on your jewelry. You can go full spell damage and still have plenty of sustain, even during a rage fight. Our weapon here, an infused Infernal Moon Dancer front bar with a shock damage enchant. You can go fire damage enchant if you want. It's up to you. If you're doing a Nightblade, you're probably going to be a Dunmer or an Ultimer, so you can pick shock or fire depending on your race. Shock is there for a little bit of extra group utility since it also procs Concussed, which helps increase your off-balance uptime. Your back bar is going to be the Maelstrom Lightning Staff. Nirnhoned with a weapon damage enchant. You can go with Far Sharpened or Infused if you so desire. Infused will get you a little bit more single target DPS, but Nirnhoned overall is going to be better for things like trash pulls and dungeons, just because if you do have the heavy attack, you're going to be doing it on this bar, and the extra 200 spell damage really helps out your AoE abilities. For your attributes, all points are into Magicka. You can see here I'm going to be using Witch Mothers and still have 17k health, so you do hit 17k health with Scoria on a Magicka Nightblade. That's just because one of your passes gives you health whenever you have a a class skill on the bar, and so you get a little bit of extra health that way. For our Mundus Stone, we're going to be going with the Apprentice. You can use the Lever. It all depends on the penetration that your group is able to provide. If they have Alkosh or Stamplar to give you Power of the Light, for example. As long as you're hitting that penetration cap of 18,200, it doesn't really matter where you get your penetration from. I like to just stick with the Apprentice Stone, and you get my penetration using CP points. It gives me a little bit more flexibility in terms of how many extra penetration that I'm going to get if I'm putting it into CP. For our skills, our front bar here is going to be Impale, Funnel Health, Twisting Path, Merciless Resolve, Inner Light, and our Destruction Staff Ultimate. And for our back bar, Crippling Grasp, you can go with the other morph, which is Debilitate. It's up to you. Crippling Grasp does do a hair more damage, but you can only apply it to one enemy at a time versus Debilitate, which allows you to apply it to multiple targets. So you can pick whichever morph you prefer. Debilitate will give you a little bit more AoE since you can apply it to multiple targets, but Crippling will give you better single target. And you got Blockade of Storms. This is where you would put your shield, either Harness or Dampen Magic. Since we're going to be doing a Parse, we're going to be using Elemental Drain instead. Siphoning attacks, Inner Light, and Soul Harvest. We will not be using Soul Harvest as our ultimate. You can actually play melee Magicka Nightblade build. I'll reserve that for a different video where you can use Soul Harvest as your main ultimate, but for a range Magicka Nightblade, you're not going to be using Soul Harvest. This is just there for the assassination passive. Right here, Pressure Point, that's just there so we get 2% extra spell crit. Now on to our champion points. You have 230 points to put into green, blue, and red. We're going to start off with our green constellations. 75 in Tenacity, 75 in Arcanist. The other 80 points can be put in these next three nodes however you'd like. 28 Shadow Ward, 26 Tumbling, and 26 in Warlord. That's just there to help conserve stamina when we have to block cast or use Break Free or things like that. Now, talking now about Spell Erosion and our blue CP trees. This particular CP setup distribution is optimized for my raid groups, the raid groups that I run with as a DPS. We only get Infused Torx Crusher, and we have Power of the Light from a Stamplar. So how you distribute points into Spell Erosion is all going to vary depending on the kind of buffs you get. For example, if you have an Infused Torx Crusher with 2 tanks running Alkosh and a Stamplar running Power of the Light, you actually only need to put 2 points into Spell Erosion to hit penetration cap. So, figure out how many extra points you need to put into Spell Erosion to hit that cap, and make adjustments accordingly to the rest of the nodes. I have 34 in Elfborn, 49 in Elemental Expert, 34 in Master at Arms, and 75 in Thaumaturge. You're always going to want to put 75 in Thaumaturge because you do get that Exploiter passive. It remains a very powerful passive in Clockwork City. Now, my general piece of advice, if you need to put points out of nodes into Spell Erosion, take them out of Elfborn first, then Master at Arms, and then Elemental Expert, and then you can do the reverse if you need to put points out of Spell Erosion and into these three nodes. Because Magicka DPS don't run nearly as high crit chance as they used to, taking points out of Elfborn is going to give you a lower impact on your DPS compared to if you take them out of, for example, Elemental Expert, which boosts basically all of your abilities. Some other things to keep in mind, other things you're going to need to use. Potions, use Essence of Spell Power, it gives you Major Sorcery, Major Prophecy, and Major Intellect. Make sure to have Alchemy up to level 50 so you can get the Medicinal Use passive. When you have that maxed out, you will always have those 3 buffs up 100% of the time as long as you use your potions as soon as they're available for use. And like I said earlier, we're going to be using Witch Mother's Potent Brew for this because it's nice to have that extra bit of regen, and with Scoria we can afford the loss in health compared to blue food, the max Magicka, max health food. You can use blue food if you want. Sustain on a Magicka Nightblade is not actually that bad, so using blue food is an option here depending on how well your group sustain is, whether you can get a sufficient amount of orbs to help out your sustain. So we're going to go ahead and start our parse. This is a 3 million dummy, so do keep that in mind when we look at our combat metrics report afterwards. In a real trial scenario, sustain's going to be a bigger problem just because you're going to be in a fight for a longer period of time. DPS is also going to be higher because you're getting more buffs from your healers, and other classes. Perhaps Engulfing Flame is being applied to the enemy as well, and you're going to have more debuffs on the enemy as well. So do keep that in mind when we check out our combat metrics parse. It shouldn't be that big of a difference, just because you get minor berserk from Merciless Resolve, so you won't really see that much of a difference there from combat prayer uptime, but it is something to keep in mind. We're going to go ahead and start our parse. There we go, 36,000, pretty much on the dot for our DPS on a 3 mil dummy. I did miss quite a few light weaves there, so this is something to keep in mind if you want to play a Magicka Nightblade. A lot of your DPS is going to be coming from Assassin's Will. As you can see here, it's our second highest source of DPS, and we can see the average here is you're hitting for about 32k every time you have it going off. However, Assassin's Will requires you to have 5 light attacks in order for it to proc. Now, if you saw during my parses, I was getting 2 Assassin's Will for each activation of Merciless Resolve, and that's kind of what you want to shoot for. 2 is the number you should shoot for. If you're only getting 1, you're going to see a big loss in DPS. The best Nightblades in the game, LZH for example, can hit up to 3 procs per Merciless Resolve, so that's how they're getting such high numbers. So do keep that in mind if you decide to play Magicka Nightblade. You're going to need to put in a lot of effort and a lot of work into perfecting your rotation, into perfecting your light weaving abilities, because of Merciless Resolve and because of the way Assassin's Will is procced. So Magicka Nightblades are definitely a much more difficult class to master compared to things like a Magicka Sorcerer or even the ranged Magplar, where rotations are more or less static. Magicka Nightblades definitely have a much more dynamic rotation, and where you have to keep track of all your dots and things like that. So that's it for this build video. Hope this guide helps, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.